Sup, people? It's King Majora here. Look, so listen, folks. I wanted to explain a little bit about the Zionist question. The, as they say, brashly with a lower IQ stare of the just simply blanket Jewish question, and it's completely nuanced. And I've actually defended Jews, but also I'm highly critical of Jews. And to prove that point today, I'm not going to blanket term them all. I'm going to identify why the Gaza massacres are happening, the Middle East, Iran, etc. I'm going to explain why the foreign policy of these radical madmen and who they depend upon. So just stick with me, and I hope you enjoy. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you're at. Thank you, and let us begin. First, let's talk about Benjamin Netanyahu and his connections to Rebbe Schneerson and Chabad Lubavitch, which is the they that I'm pointing to, a radical end times group of Messianic Jewish extremists who take the Talmud, the Zohar, Torah, and etc. in a vein that promotes a singular Messianic figure at the end, who basically him and his, Mashiach ben David and his sidekick, Mashiach ben Yosef, who, depending on interpretation, either dies or is, basically in the cause of David. And basically, this group under this guy named Rebbe Schneerson, basically Rebbe instead of rabbi, and he basically had a big pull over the Netanyahu and his administrations over time. And, this guy has, of course, passed away, but many people still believe him to this day to be their flavor of Messiah. So we got to be careful with these types of people and who exactly we call, basically the ones in charge. Because, Donald Trump has Friends of Chabad, Jared Kushner. He when he went to college, he was in Friends of Chabad. Of course, Ivanka Trump, Yael Kushner converting, it's all about that. So basically, Chabad Lubavitch networks, Chabadniks are all within the Trump administration and Netanyahu. So what is the strong connection? Is there actually a proof? Yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu got told by Rebbe Schneerson that he will be here to basically pass the torch of rulership or scepter to Messiah. And their Messiah figure is basically going to enslave everyone else and basically have two sets of rules, so to speak. This is counting if they get away with it with the likes of like the Talpiot program, cybersecurity, and blackmail and intelligence apparatuses, the World Economic Forum status with ID 2020 and cryptocurrencies and the CBDCs. It all depends upon people's acceptance of these. But anyway, I digress. We need to talk about this, so let's play a video of the connections between Benjamin Netanyahu and the Rebbe Schneerson.
40 years ago, when Netanyahu was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, he met Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the leader of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, known simply as the Rebbe.
He said, you're going to this house of darkness, the UN, which was very, very unfriendly to Israel at the time. He called it the house of darkness. And he said, even in the greatest darkness, if you light a candle, it spreads a great light that can be seen from afar.
The Rebbe reportedly believed Netanyahu had a mission from God to prepare Israel for the coming of the Messiah, or in Hebrew, the Moshiach. Over the next decade, the two men developed a close relationship. Soon after entering Israel's parliament for the first time, Netanyahu paid his respects to his mentor.
Back then, Netanyahu was probably the only ally that he could work with in Israeli politics. He obviously demands from Netanyahu to take some steps to hasten the coming of Messiah, which is to make Israel a more religious place and to take certain concrete steps in this regard. And Netanyahu says, I'm definitely doing that.
התנאים שהיא מספיק, כאילו שהיום כבר כמה שעות בגלל ועדיין ריבו.
The Rebbe never visited Israel, not once, and yet from his home in Brooklyn, he was able to influence Israeli politics.
הבטיחו לי בוועדה כמה הבטחה שמכל השיחות תהיינה כל עניינים של ויתור על שטחים.
His influence was recognized by American politicians too. US presidents paid homage to him, establishing and proclaiming a National Education and Sharing Day in honor of his birthday.
And please give my warmest regards to the Rebbe on this his 86th birthday.
Menachem Mendel Schneerson was born in 1902 in the Black Sea port of Nikolaev, which was part of the Russian Empire but now part of Ukraine. He and his wife lived in Berlin and Paris before fleeing the Nazis in 1941, seeking refuge in New York, where they put down roots. A decade later, in 1951, he took over the Chabad movement from his father-in-law, who died the previous year. Menachem Schneerson revived and grew the movement for over 40 years until his death in New York in 1994. His followers in Brooklyn were devastated.
Most of them believed he would never die. They still believe Rabbi Menachem Schneerson will be physically resurrected as Mashiach, the Messiah.
A physical resurrection when he's going to come back in his full glory imminently and redeem the entire world.
Currently, the center of the Chabadic movement is in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Crown Heights. So it is an American movement in terms of its center, but it is also a global movement. One of the biggest purposes of Chabad is to bring those quote-unquote lost Jews back into Judaism. So Chabad has its own rabbis and emissaries appointed all around the world. It is a global movement.
Headquartered in Brooklyn, the Chabad movement has a presence in every state in America and in over 100 countries around the world, with a particularly high focus in Europe and in Israel. It has hundreds of thousands of followers and runs synagogues, schools, drug rehabilitation centers, and care homes. On the face of it, the movement has been for the betterment of Jews around the world. But according to one analyst, its modus operandi has provided a template for a terror group.
We have good reasons to believe that Fatah got inspired from the Chabad movement. One of the high-ranking members of the Fatah movement was praising the Chabad movement in the sense that the Chabad used to send its emissaries and rabbis all around the world, just like Fatah was doing, sending out teachers to Central Asia and to Africa and to other parts of the world.
For over 40 years, the charismatic Rebbe led the movement. His $1 donations, including to Netanyahu, came with a blessing to his followers and a reminder to give to those less fortunate. A couple of years after this meeting, the Rebbe reportedly told a young Netanyahu that he would one day become Prime Minister of Israel and would be the nation's last leader before handing the scepter to the Messiah.
Fascinating stuff, am I right? Religious prophecy. So, with that out of the way, I want to go to something else that's not really widely reported on, is this Iron Wall speech by Vladimir Jabotinsky. This guy was a revolutionary Zionist who basically became the backbone of what Likud is today. And basically through him and his efforts of the basically explaining how the Zionists feel about the Arabs and the Palestinian region and the ideas and concepts of the states and their solutions. So I'm going to read you an excerpt of 51 documents by Lenny Brenner. This guy was amazing. I mean, granted, I'm not I'm a right-wing libertarian, more or less, and, this guy was basically a Trotskyite. I say there's no difference between a Trotskyite and a Republican, if I'm going to be honest. But basically, he merely categorized or cataloged these things. And, more or less, basically he's got several instances before, during, and after of the Zionists working with the the Nazis, basically, and going into the Balfour Declaration, Rothschild and the land annexed to Palestine from British to the Zionist Federation. But let's get into the Iron Wall. 51 documents. Zionist collaboration with the Nazis, edited by Lenny Brenner, contains explosive informations historians ignore. Vladimir Jabotinsky, The Iron Wall, We and the Arabs. Resvit, Berlin, November 4th, 1923. Note, the Iron Wall is the ideological underpinning of Zionist revisionism. The ideology of the Likud, the party of Benjamin Netanyahu, Colonel Blimp, colonialism has never had more articulate champion, and it was the basis of the movement's orientation towards Mussolini in the 30s. It first appeared in English in South Africa's November 26, 1937 Jewish Herald, and that is by Lenny Brenner's note. Now the actual text. The Iron Wall. Colonialization of Palestine agreement with Arabs impossible at present. Zionism must go forward by Vladimir Jabotinsky. It is an excellent rule to begin an article with the most important point, but this time I find it necessary to begin with an introduction, and moreover with a personal introduction. I am reputed to be an enemy of the Arabs, who want to have them ejected from Palestine and so forth. It is not true. Emotionally, my attitude to the Arabs is the same as to all other nations. Polite indifference. Politically, my attitude is determined by two principles. First of all, I consider it utterly impossible to eject the Arabs from Palestine. There will always be two nations in Palestine, which is good enough for me, provided the Jews become the majority. And secondly, I belong to the group that once drew up the Helsingfors Program and the program of national rights for all nationalities living in the same state. In drawing up that program, we had in mind not only the Jews, but all nations everywhere, and the basis is equality of rights. I am prepared to take an oath binding ourselves and our sentence that we shall never do anything contrary to the principle of equal rights, and that we shall never try to eject anyone. This seems to me a fairly peaceful credo, but it is quite another question whether it is always possible to realize a peaceful aim by peaceful means. For the answer to this question does not depend on our attitude to the Arabs, but entirely on the attitude of the Arabs to us and to Zionism. Now, after this introduction, we may begin to proceed to the subject. Voluntary agreement not possible. There can be no voluntary agreement between ourselves and the Palestinian Arabs. Not now, nor in the prospective future. I say this with such conviction, not because I want to hurt the moderate Zionists. I do not believe that they will be hurt, except for those who were born blind. They realized long ago that it is utterly impossible to obtain the voluntary consent of the Palestinian Arabs for converting Palestine from Arab country into a country with a Jewish majority. My readers have a general idea of the history of colonialization in other countries. I suggest that they consider all of the precedents with which they are acquainted, and see whether there is one solitary instance of any colonization being carried on with the consent of the native population. There is no such precedent. The native population, civilized or uncivilized, have always stubbornly resisted the colonialists, irrespective of whether they were civilized or savage. And it made no difference whether the colonists behaved decently or not. The companions of Cortez and Pizarro, or as some people will remind us, our own ancestors under Joshua ben Nun, behaved like brigands. But the Pilgrim Fathers, the first real pioneers of the North America, were people of the highest morality, who did not want to do harm to anyone, least of all to the Red Indians, and they honestly believed that there was room enough in the prairies both for the paleface and the redskin. Yet the native population fought with the same ferocity against the good, colonialists against the bad. Every native population, civilized or not, regards its land as its national home, of which it is the sole master, and it wants to retain that mastery always. It will refuse to admit not only new masters, but even new partners or collaborators. Arabs, not fools. This is equally true of the Arabs. Our peacemongers are trying to persuade us that the Arabs are either fools whom we can deceive by masking our real aims, or that they are corrupt and can be bribed to abandon to us their claim to priority in Palestine, in return for cultural and economic advantages. And I repudiate this conception of the Palestinian Arabs. Culturally, they are 500 years behind us. They have neither our endurance nor our determination, but they are just as good psychologists as we are. and their minds have been sharpened like ours by centuries of fine-spun logomachy. We may tell them whatever we like about the innocence of our aims, watering them down and sweetening them with honeyed words to make them palatable. But they know what we want, as well as we know what they do not want. They feel, at least, that the same instinctive, jealous love of Palestine as the old Aztecs felt for ancient Mexico and the Sioux for their ruling prairies. To imagine, as our Arabophiles do, that they will voluntarily consent to the realization of Zionism in return for the moral and material conveniences which the Jewish colonialists bring with them. It is a childish notion which has at a bottom a kind of contempt for the Arab people. It means that they despise the Arab race, which they regard as corrupt mob that can be bought and sold, and are willing to give up their fatherland for a good railway system. All natives resist colonists. There is no justification for such a belief. It may be that some individual Arabs take bribes, but that does not mean that the Arab people of Palestine as a whole will sell their fervent patriotism that they guard so jealously, and which even the Papans will never sell. Every native population in the world resists colonists as long as it has the slightest hope of being able to rid itself of the dangers of being colonized. That is what the Arabs in Palestine are doing, and what they will persist in doing as long as there remains a solitary spark of hope that they will be able to prevent the transformation of Palestine into the land of Israel. Arab comprehension. Some of us have introduced ourselves to believe that all of the troubles is due to misunderstanding. The Arabs have not understood us, and that the only reason why they resist us, if we can only make it clear to them how moderate our intentions really are, they will immediately extend to us their hand in friendship. This belief is utterly unfounded, and it has been exploited again and again. I shall recall only one instance of many. A few years ago, when the late Mr. Sokolow was on one of his periodic visits to Palestine, he addressed a meeting on this very question of the misunderstanding. He demonstrated lucidly and convincingly that the Arabs are terribly mistaken if they think that we have any desire to deprive them of their possessions or to drive them out of their country, or that we want to oppress them. We do not even ask for a Jewish government to hold the mandate of the League of Nations. One of the Arab papers, El Kamel, replied at the time in an editorial article, the purport of which was this: "The Zionists are making a fuss about nothing. There is no misunderstanding. All that Mr. Sokolow says about the Zionist intentions is true, but the Arabs know that without him, of course, the Zionists cannot be thinking of driving the Arabs out of the country, or oppressing them, nor do they contemplate a Jewish government. Quite obviously, they are now concerned with the only thing, that the Arabs should not hinder their immigration. The Zionists assure us that even immigration will be regulated strictly according to the economic needs of Palestine. The Arabs have never doubted that. It is a truism, for otherwise there can be no immigration." No misunderstanding. This Arab editor was actually willing to agree that Palestine has a very large potential absorptive capacity, meaning that there is room for a great many Jews in the country without displacing a single Arab. There is only one thing the Zionists want, and it is the one thing that the Arabs do not want, for that is the way by which the Jews would gradually become the majority, and then a Jewish government would follow automatically, and the future of the Arab minority would depend on the goodwill of the Jews. And a minority status is not a good thing, as the Jews themselves are never tired of pointing out. So there is no misunderstanding. The Zionists want only one thing, Jewish immigration, and this Jewish immigration is what the Arabs do not want. This statement of the position by the Arab editor is so logical, so obvious, so indisputable that everyone ought to know it by heart, and it should be made the basis of all of our future discussions on the Arab question. It does not matter at all which phraseology we employ in explaining our colonizing aims, Herzl or C. Herbert Samuel. Colonialization carries its own explanation. The only possible explanation, unalterable as clear as daylight to every ordinary Jew and every ordinary Arab. Colonialization can only have one aim, and Palestine Arabs cannot accept this aim. It lies in the very nature of things, and in this particular regard, nature cannot be changed. The Iron Wall. We cannot offer any adequate compensation to the Palestinian Arabs in return for Palestine, and therefore there is no likelihood of any voluntary agreement between being reached, and so that all of those who regard such an agreement as a condition sine qua non for Zionism may as well say non and withdraw from Zionism. Zionist colonialization must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population, which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protections of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach. That is our Arab policy, not what we should be, but what it actually is, whether we admit it or not. What need, otherwise, of the Balfour Declaration, or or of this mandate. Their value to us is that an outside power has undertaken to create in this country such conditions of administration and security that if the native population should desire to hinder our work, they will find it impossible. And we are all of us, without any exception, demanding it day after day that this outside power should carry out this task vigorously and with determination. In this matter, there is no difference between our militarists and our vegetarians, except that the first prefer that the Iron Wall should consist of Jewish soldiers, and the others are content that they should be British. We all demand that there should be an Iron Wall, yet we keep spoiling our own case by talking about agreement, which means telling the mandatory government that the important thing is not the Iron Wall, but discussion. Empty rhetoric of this kind is dangerous, and that is why it is not only a pleasure but a duty to discredit it and to demonstrate it, and that both fanatics and dishonest. That it is both fanatic and dishonest. Zionism, moral and just. 2 brief remarks. In the first place, if anyone objects that this point of view is immoral, I answer. It is not true. Either Zionism is moral and just, or it is immoral and unjust. But that is a question that we should have settled before we became Zionists. Actually, we have settled that question, and in the affirmative. We hold that Zionism is moral and just, and since it is moral and just, justice must be done, no matter whether Joseph or Simon or Ivan or Ahmed agreed with it or not. There is no other morality. Eventual agreement. In the second place, this does not mean that there cannot be any agreement with the Palestine Arabs. What is impossible is a voluntary agreement. As long as the Arabs feel that there is the least of hope getting rid of us, they will refuse to give up this hope in return for either kind words or for bread and butter, because they are not a rabble, but a living people, and with a living people yields matter of such a vital character, it is only when there is no longer any hope of getting rid of us, because they can make no breach in the Iron Wall. Not till then will they drop their extremist leaders who watchword is never, and the leadership will pass to the moderate group who will approach us with a proposal that we should both agree to mutual concessions. Then we may expect them to discuss honestly practical questions such as a guarantee against Arab displacement or equal rights for Arab citizens or Arab national integrity. And when that happens, I am convinced that we Jews will be found ready to give them satisfactory guarantees so that both peoples can live together in peace like good neighbors. But the only way to obtain such an agreement is the Iron Wall, which is to say a stronger power in Palestine that is not amenable to any Arab pressure. In other words, the only way to reach an agreement in the future is to abandon all ideas of seeking an agreement at present. That was Vladimir Jabotinsky. Zeev Jabotinsky. Vladimir Jabotinsky, orator and writer. And he was a Zionist leader that was foundational to the Likud party in its earliest foundations and revisionist Zionism movements that reflect the modern Zionist political environment geopolitically. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I tried to make this quick and easy to understand. So, I hope I gave you a foundation to the radical beliefs of some of these people that are basically having the powers of office from the United States to Israel to worldwide. And we basically got to chin check these people because they feel like they're right now arrogant, allowing everything about the treachery and conspiracies. Basically what I talk about would more or less be, not even spoken about. So, they're in our face. They're letting you know. Yeah, Epstein, all of that. Yeah, basically, what are you going to do about it? What will you do about it?